What's up, everyone? Coach Tony from Bonvac Strength, and welcome to another episode of Ask Coach Tony. And this week's question comes from Steve, who writes in, several years ago, you wrote a great article called 6 Thoughts on Training Older Lifters. How would you augment those thoughts to fight decreasing muscle mass? What if you had an older lifter with good strength, but perhaps they would benefit from adding some muscle mass? Thanks, Steve. I thought it was a good article too. Before I answer this question, make sure that you like and subscribe so that you can see future videos. And if you do have a question that you want me to answer in a future episode, make sure that you ask it in the comments. And what I think I'm going to do here is I'm going to revisit this article that I wrote a while back and kind of go through those 6 points and say if I still believe them, if I would elaborate, if I would change my stance on any of them. And after that, I'll dig a little bit into what the research says about older lifters' ability to build muscle mass. And I'll start off by saying that we do have good evidence that you still can add muscle mass as you age. It gets more difficult. The degree to which you can add muscle mass decreases, but we'll talk about kind of the specifics of it and what you can do to kind of mitigate it. So I'll put the link to this article in the description so you guys can check it out yourself. But I wrote this piece, this blog post back in 2021. It's called 6 Thoughts on Training Older Lifters, and I just kind of had 6 individual points about things that I thought were important. The first point is reevaluate your big 3. The idea being that as you age, you don't necessarily have to do the barbell back squat, the barbell bench press, and the barbell deadlift, either conventional or sumo, is kind of your main 3 strength exercises. I believe that for anybody who's not going to be a competitive power lifter, but we know that joint stress from the big power lifts can be very high. So as you get older, just consider using different exercises as the main way to get really strong. Safety bar squat, trap bar deadlift, like neutral grip bench press, great options. What you can get super creative as long as you can load it heavy and chase strength in those exercises. Keep doing those, especially if they make your body feel good. Patience with progressive overload. I think it kind of goes along with the idea of how hypertrophy kind of slows down as you get older. It's not impossible. It will just probably take longer. Strength specifically due to perhaps like neurological adaptations and just the overall joint stress from years of lifting if you've been doing it a long time. With hypertrophy probably being more of a hormonal thing, reduction in testosterone, maybe things like insulin resistance. So maybe you just don't respond as well to a caloric surplus as maybe you used to, but still agree with that. Definitely be patient with progressive overload. It's okay to do the same weights, kind of over and over until they get easy. You don't have to live and die by, adding 5 pounds to the bar every workout. Point number 3, reduce spinal loading to once a week. I still think this is a really good idea. So if you're training, let's say 3 days a week, and you're doing all full body sessions, consider putting, like your squat and your deadlift variation on the same day. And then on other days where you're doing lower body stuff, using exercises that don't load the spine as much, maybe some single leg stuff like lunges or step ups, perhaps using some machine based stuff like a leg press. I think that as you accumulate wear and tear, certain spinal conditions, things like spinal stenosis or spondylolisthesis, things that just can make life pretty difficult, general daily activities kind of miserable as you get older. If you don't keep those things in check, I think reducing the frequency of spinal loading, so basically heavy squatting and deadlifting to once a week is still a really, really good idea. Or even just like alternating the 2 each week. 1 week you squat heavy, the next week you deadlift heavy, and alternate through that so you're not doing them both really heavy in the same week. I think that's a good idea still. Next one, use lower body, upper body, full body splits. So kind of going back to training 3 days a week, instead of doing, 4 days a week, upper, lower, splitting it into a 3-day program where one day you do lower body, next day you do upper body, and the third day you do full body. I still like to use this split quite a bit. I've kind of leaned a little bit more towards doing full body every session for anybody who's training 3 days a week. But I think for an older lifter who perhaps is looking for less joint stress, bookending the lower body sessions at the end of the week, I think is a good idea. If you train Monday, Wednesday, Friday, on Monday you do lower body, Wednesday you do upper body, and Friday you do your full body. So you're not training lower body too close together in a given training week, I still think that's a good idea. If you're talking specifically about hypertrophy for older lifters, I do think that frequency kind of matters, So if you were doing that lower upper full split, you're not hitting each major muscle group quite as often as you could be if you were training full body 3 days a week, for example. So if you're really trying to get jacked as you age, you might consider doing full body or doing the upper lower split, finding a way to train those muscle groups a little more often than just twice a week. Point number 5, ultra high rep accessories. Instead of trying to do most of your accessory exercises in more of a traditional 8 to 12 rep range or 10 to 15 rep range, really pushing those accessory exercises to very high reps to reduce joint stress. I think I talked about this in the last video as well. This is probably a good idea for longevity's sake. We know that mechanical tension is the main driver of hypertrophy, and you're more likely to accumulate more mechanical tension if you're loading a little bit heavier. But a point I made within this point was utilizing more machine stuff. I think that's a really good idea. If you're doing, upper back work, opting for more like machine rows and lat pull downs versus doing like a ton of pull-ups or a ton of like really heavy dumbbell rows or barbell rows, just stuff like that, like swapping to more machine-based accessories to allow those target muscle groups to fail first, so you don't have some sort of other thing failing first and just not wearing down your joints with heavy free weight stuff. Probably a good idea still. So I still agree with pretty much all this stuff. And point number 6, doing some sort of daily maintenance to kind of keep yourself in the game. It's a good idea for anybody, on days that you're not training or something separate from your training session. Doing something to help your body recover, whether it's some foam rolling or some additional mobility work. I'm not big on like recovery stuff like ice baths and saunas and stuff like that. I think that stuff's super overrated. I think you're better off taking a nap instead of doing that stuff. But the daily maintenance stuff, I think, is still a good idea. It's not necessarily going to have a direct impact on hypertrophy, but if it allows you to come back and train hard again sooner, that's obviously a positive thing. And something when I was reading this before, something I would certainly add to the daily maintenance aspect of it is just like get out and do more low intensity aerobic stuff. Go for more walks, go for more hikes, go for more bike rides. I always joke with my clients that like lifting doesn't really make you live much longer. It makes your life better while you're alive, but it's the cardio stuff that is going to make you live longer. So if you are in your 50s, 60s, 70s, and you intend on living much, much longer than that, you got to supplement your strength training with a decent amount of aerobic work, because that's really what's going to get the heart and the lungs primed to live a long, healthy life. So yeah, still agree with all these points. I'm going to segue more into the hypertrophy specific stuff, and I've got a study pulled up here, which I will also link in the description, that I thought gave a really good insight into the ability of older lifters to build muscle. So this is a meta-analysis from the Journal of Sports Medicine, published in 2020, titled Effects of Resistance Training on Muscle Size and Strength in Very Elderly Adults. Perhaps not totally politically correct, but what this study did was it looked at 22 studies that it reviewed, looking specifically at lifters or people who are 75 years and older. So I think most of us would expect people who are 75 and older to have a really, really hard time building muscle. Maybe, there's just no prayer of doing that anymore. At that age, maybe that's a prevailing belief. But what this study found was that these people were actually able to have a significant amount of muscle growth, and muscle growth was able to happen even at 75 through traditional resistance training, and that strength gains could be very pronounced at age 75, perhaps at similar rates to people of less advanced age. So we know that strength comes a little easier than muscle because of the neurological aspect of it. It takes a lot more effort and resources and recovery to add muscle tissue. And what I would surmise is that it's probably largely a hormonal thing. As we age, testosterone goes down significantly. I don't know the rate of it off the top of my head, but that's obviously going to play a huge impact. But we know that testosterone levels will go down less over time if you take care of yourself. So if you exercise, so if you lift weights, if you do enough aerobic work, if you sleep well, if you eat well, you take care of your body, you take care of your mind, you reduce stress levels by as little as possible. I don't think you need me to lay out how to, testosterone max here. It's pretty obvious, and there's a lot of other resources out there that are probably better than me. But, if you take care of this stuff earlier in life and you get a really good foundation of health and muscle tissue and strength, that's going to set you up to be able to not only just maintain that as you get older, but also to continue to build on top of that. My two oldest clients are in their 70s. They're a husband and wife couple, very, very active, throughout their entire life. So they had a great base of fitness when they first started working with me. But it's been really, really incredible to see how much they've been able to make progress, even at an age where a lot of people would expect them not to. I was actually having this conversation with a new client today who's in his 60s, and I said, when I get an intake form for somebody who says they're in their 60s, I don't really know what to expect. They could be a wide range of health status and abilities. Somebody who's 60 years old and has never exercised before could be pretty non-functional and kind of really be in a tough spot physically. But somebody who's been exercising, somebody who's 60 who's been exercising for, nearly 50 years could seem much younger and healthier, more spry than you would expect. So I think one of the best ways to make sure that you can continue to gain muscle into an advanced age is just take care of your shit years and years and years before that. Give yourself a really good baseline. So the point being that I think a lot of really common sense training principles still come into play as you get older. A couple of small things that I would encourage people to take into consideration if you're older versus the way I would train somebody who was younger. Those are all outlined in that blog post. And then certainly dig into that study that I'm going to post a link to, because it's really, really super interesting, showing that people, even at 75 years and older, can still get jacked. Maybe not as jacked as somebody who's 25 or 35, at least not at the same rate, but it's still possible. It's not a hypertrophy death sentence to be of an advanced age. So there's hope for our elder lifters out there. All right, that's it for that. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you have more questions that you want me to answer, make sure that you ask them in the comments, and make sure to like and subscribe so you can see future episodes.